A message direct to Canberra today. Busloads have arrived in the capital to vent their anger. They'll get some public backing from Tony Abbott, but the Prime Minister won't be there. She's spending the day inspecting renewable energy sources and talking to young activists who back her carbon tax. From Canberra, Susan McDonald reports on a day of duelling climate campaigns.
With a windswept plain as the backdrop, Julia Gillard continues her clean energy mission, one turbine at a time.
Well, turning it off's like Tony Abbott turning off action on climate change.
It was back on in seconds, accompanied by a message of determination.
If we are going to drive this clean energy future, we must price carbon.
Her campaign's been given a helping hand.
Here we have 12,000 signatures supporting action on climate change.
12,000, fantastic.
Yes.
Unions and environmentalists are on side.
We know that a majority of people in the community want to take action on climate change.
But Tony Abbott's People's Revolt is gathering pace too.
Well, there's a groundswell of people that have finally had a gutful.
Buses of protesters left Sydney this morning bound for Parliament House.
And everyone's fed up with it. And, you can't get away with lies all the time.
Well, hopefully it'll be peaceful and that someone will come out and acknowledge that we're there.
The opposition leader will. He'll address the coalition of anti-tax groups.
A one-sided carbon tax, a unilateral carbon tax, is an act of economic self-harm.
But the government's labelled the crowd climate change deniers and extremists, and they've bundled Tony Abbott in with them.
It's an appeal to extremism, and extremism will always be there in our community, but that doesn't mean we should agree with it.
As protesters make their views known outside Parliament, there's also disquiet among the business community. Some on the government's own carbon tax roundtable have labelled the consultation process a sham, but Julia Gillard insists she's listening.
I completely reject that suggestion. We are engaged in genuine and direct dialogue with business.
And anyone willing to listen.
Mr. Gillard, do you accept the science of climate change and what do you plan to do about it?
I certainly do accept the science of climate change.
Preaching to the converted. Susan McDonald, ABC News, Canberra.
Let's go to political reporter Francis Bell now, who's outside Parliament House in Canberra. So, Francis, how big is the crowd there?
Well, Ros, the crowd is still rolling in. There's about 1,000 people here so far, but we're expecting a few more to turn up before the speeches start in about 10 minutes' time. There's people from a variety of backgrounds and ages here, and they've come from nearby in Canberra, but also from those busloads from Sydney and surrounding areas. So the crowd is gathering and they're expecting to get proceedings underway very shortly.
And what's the Prime Minister's reaction to the rally?
Julia Gillard was asked about this rally this morning and she said that she respects everybody's right to a peaceful protest, and that's what she was expecting here today. They're a very vocal crowd here, and as you can see, lots of placards stating the case of the people in the crowd that's being against this carbon tax. She won't be addressing this rally though. She said that she speaks to people for and against the carbon tax every day, but she won't be down here addressing the crowd. We are expecting to hear from Tony Abbott though.
And are there plans for rallies in other cities?
Yes, Ros, they're expecting to have rallies in a range of capital cities today, in Perth, Brisbane, Adelaide and Melbourne. And there's also another rally planned for Sydney next week. So it's not just today that this message is being pushed home to the government. They're expecting a fairly lengthy campaign.
Is there a feeling, Francis, in Canberra that the government is doing enough to get its carbon tax up and running by the middle of next year?
Well, the jury's still out on that, Ros. The government is certainly not backing down from its own campaign to convince the public that this carbon tax, the carbon price and the ETS is needed. But as you can see, with the numbers of people who've turned out to this rally, they are up against it in terms of convincing some sectors of the community. And we're yet to see whether Julia Gillard will be able to win over people and be able to push this through with the support that she's hoping to get.
Francis, thank you.
Thanks, Ros.
Thanks, Kim. Good afternoon. Angry protesters have gathered across the country today, rallying against the federal government's planned carbon tax. At Parliament House in Canberra, around 3,000 people attended the event, with many holding signs accusing the Prime Minister of lying about introducing a price on carbon. Protesters and opposition MPs say a tax will hurt the economy, raise the cost of living and do little to combat climate change.
There are a lot of diverse opinions about climate change, and I don't think this is about climate change. Climate change happens, mankind does make a contribution. It's important to have an intelligent response, not a stupid one. And an intelligent response to climate change means more trees, better soils and smarter technology.
Good evening, Juanita Phillips with ABC News. Opponents of the federal government's carbon tax have made their feelings known at a rowdy protest in Canberra. They branded the Prime Minister a liar, praised Tony Abbott and heard from a climate change sceptic who says the world could do with much more carbon. But the government's dismissed them as extremists and has called on the opposition leader to do the same. From Canberra, political correspondent Greg Jennett.
They were angry. Make the streets free. They were determined and anti-Labor to the core.
What do we want? No!
By imitation and artwork,
it's a liar bird.
They pounded their target. It was personal, on the ground and in the air.
She lied to you!
Government MPs dismissed them as extremists and boycotted the event. But it was a magnet to politicians past.
You're saying there should be an election on this?
Yes, I do.
And it was a must for the politician who ordered the People's Revolt in the first place.
I do not see scientific heretics. I do not see environmental vandals. I see people who want honest government.
Tony Abbott may not have seen sceptics in front of him because they were behind him.
All living things would be better off if we had more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
They're calling themselves a revolt and are claiming to have mustered more than 3,000 here today. The numbers disputed by the government and the crowd almost ignored by it. But the organisers are promising to come back time and time again between now and the next election.
They're Tony Abbott's people.
It's a representative snapshot of Middle Australia.
But they're certainly not the government's.
The decision by the Leader of the Opposition to associate himself with the placards we saw today is unbefitting a leader of a major political party in this country.
The Minister found friends for his side of the argument.
We have 12,000 signatures supporting action on climate change.
12,000, fantastic.
Yes.
The Prime Minister did too.
Prime Minister Gillard, do you accept the science of climate change and what do you plan to do about it?
A lot more of this.
If we are going to drive this clean energy future, we must price carbon.
High voltage determination. Greg Jennett, ABC.
Well, Tony Abbott called for a people's revolt against the carbon tax, and today he got it. The numbers were variously estimated at between 1,500 and several thousand. The angry, banner-toting anti-tax protesters, many of whom came from interstate to the lawns of Parliament House, were addressed by the opposition leader. Political correspondent Tom Iggulden's report contains strong language.
A self-styled People's Revolution, complete with regimental banners and even its own Air Force.
Sometimes you've just got to try and get the message to the government because they just don't listen to it.
There were real rock stars.
We'll start a revolution and make the streets free.
And rock star receptions.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Tony Abbott.
He called for the uprising against the tax, and today they responded. And just like any other concert, the adoring crowd even knew the lyrics.
The Prime Minister, 6 days before the election, stood up before the Australian people and she said, "There will be no carbon tax under the government I lead."
Another famous redhead was there, furthering, she said, her own prospects of electoral victory by opposing the carbon tax.
We've got to stop our politicians just pushing this on to us. They're destroying our lifestyle, our way of life, our culture, our country.
There was, however, one notable absence.
I think Julia is chickened out. I think she's found something else to do rather than come out with the opposition.
I asked this question on behalf of the thousands of people who were gathered outside Parliament House today, who the Prime Minister would not talk to.
On the question of attending the rally outside Parliament House today, I'm not aware that I was invited, Mr Speaker, but as I understand it, the Leader of the Opposition did not lack for red-headed company out at that rally, Mr Speaker. He had a red-headed friend out at that rally, so I'm sure he would not have missed me.
The decision by the Leader of the Opposition to associate himself with the placards we saw today, the messages that have been provided and the groups that have participated is unbefitting a leader of a major political party in this country.
Back outside, the rally threatened to turn ugly when a small number of carbon tax supporters turned up.
That's provocation. Why don't you fuck off?
Did I hear you threatened to lynch one of them? No, I said, well, they're looking to get lynched, I think.
That sounds a bit extremist, doesn't it?
Oh, well, apparently we're all extremists, so, you know.
Well, the crowd here has been calling Julie Gillard a bitch, a dictator and a liar, though they deny that they're extremists. This is just one edge, though, of a two-pronged attack on the carbon tax. At the other end of town, big businesses who say they'll be affected by the tax are calling it an act of economic suicide. 140 of the nation's biggest carbon polluters met today in a closed-door forum in Parliament House. A statement called on the government to be upfront about how it's going to help them stay in business after the introduction of the tax. The government's climate change advisor has some ideas about how to ease that transition.
If we're going to achieve what we have to achieve to avoid dangerous climate change, then we're going to have to spend a lot more on innovation.
That's not what emitters have in mind. They want compensation to offset the effects of the tax. But Ross Garno says there should be limits.
Let's have an independent body measure that, and that's the scheme that can work from 3 years onwards. Any legitimate claims will be handled in that way. You will not get uneconomic contraction of Australian business if that approach is adopted.
All signs point to more conflict ahead on the carbon tax. Tom Iggulden, Lateline.